Three Fort Music Fest is almost here. The festival will take over downtown from March 20th to the 24th. Come discover hundreds of bands with me. I bet you'll find a bunch of new faves. Think of it as a real-life playlist from your coolest friend. 5-day passes start at $295, but it's not just about the music. From beer to comedy to food and tech, there's lots to explore. Check out the lineup and snag your ticket today at treefortmusicfest.com.
Today on CityCast Boise, we're dissecting the big stories of the week. Boise continues to stand against censorship, and Republicans are realizing that they should probably keep tabs on maternal deaths. Plus, we have recommendations for what you should do this weekend. It's Friday, January 19th. I'm Nick Kwa, and this is what Boise's talking about. Hey Blake, happy end of the week. Are you frozen yet? Are you trapped beneath a layer of ice? How's it going for you?
I kind of am. Winter took its time to get here, but we're in the throes of it now. I feel like it's lost its novelty. It's losing its solidity, and everything's becoming slushy. So it's great. I couldn't be happier. Yeah.
Yeah, the novelty thing. I love snow, but we had all 48 hours of it, so whatever.
Yeah. I love snow while it's falling, and then I'm done. Yeah.
Alrighty, let's get into our first story, which is more of an update than a full thing that we can sink our teeth into. So this is about the library bill that's sort of popping back up again. Last Friday, we heard from Boise State Public Radio reporter Jimmy Dawson about how the Idaho House is trying to bring back a slightly modified version of their library bill, which is a book ban by any other name, much like any other rose. Not that he would get that because he would ban that book. This one would prohibit public and school libraries from making, quote, material harmful to minors available to children under 18. Part of a long-standing super dumb culture war frontier. What's the latest update here? Is the bill still moving forward?
It was through Monday, all through Thursday midday, and then suddenly it kind of got pulled on Thursday afternoon. It went forward to the House, and then its sponsor pulled it and is essentially, he said, working on some sort of compromise bill. We don't know much about this yet. The bill's original sponsor, Jaron Crane, Republican of Nampa, is working with another Republican, Jeff Schroeder, out of Mountain Home, who's actually on the Senate side. And we've actually had Schroeder on the show before to talk about, one, Mountain Home, and also two, extremism in generally. He went off on Idaho Freedom Foundation, and so that was fun. But they are apparently working on this kind of compromise bill together that essentially we don't know essentially what it's going to do, but House Bill 384, which a lot of people really organized around and a lot of people came out and testified against, is being put back on the shelf, so to speak. And so we're not totally sure what it's going to look like moving forward, but at least that one is out of the way. So
do we know anything about what, might happen next, and specifically if other players will be involved at this time?
Right. So the original sponsor, Crane, said that he is working with the Idaho Library Association on this one.
And this is new. This is a new player in this situation.
Yeah, or at least that they have been consulted. That part's a little unclear right now. The Idaho Library Association, as you can imagine, was very opposed to House Bill 384. They were really opposed to the library bill last year as well, which went through and was eventually vetoed by Governor Little at the last minute because there's a $2,500 lawsuit slapped onto any sort of challenge to a book,
which just would bring pure chaos into the situation.
Yeah, it would. And so that was cut, down to 250, so 10% of that this time around. But of course, the Idaho Library Association is predictably against censorship in this and most forms, at least, that I know of. And so they were opposed to it. And apparently, according to Laura Guido from the Idaho Press, in her article about this is just, end of day Thursday that we know about this. She said, quoted Crane as saying that the Idaho Library Association is quote unquote neutral on this new bill, on this compromise. So, we can expect that maybe it's a bit of an improvement in that regard. We just don't know the exact machinations of how it's going to work.
Got it. I mean, we're still up in the air. It seems like we're very early in this particular stage of the story. Right. Okay, so I guess we'll be watching to see what this compromise bill might be. Shout out to Jimmy and Laura at Adam Press, who's keeping us all updated on the TikTok of the Capitol. If you're interested, obviously, like follow up in both of their Boise State Public Radio on one hand, Idaho Press on the other. Just keep the story going. But let's step back for a minute because Boise, I mean, I think reasonable people hate this kind of censorship because this is censorship. And they, at least, lots of folks from Boise showed up in big numbers earlier this week to protest at the Capitol, right? Like, and I remember, shout out to the Lit Room over at Garden City. I've been following a lot of their calls to strike and calls to action on their social media accounts. That is a dynamic at play here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's always difficult to know when you're in Boise kind of what the actual lay of the land of what people think really is, because the people that you get to come testify at the Capitol, it's pretty accurate to say that, one, they're just not a representative sample of, everybody across the state. It's much easier for people who live in Boise to get off work or just stop by the Capitol, whatever it is, to be able to testify. However, on Sunday, this previous Sunday, hundreds of people showed up at the Capitol for a protest in the middle of the snowstorm and, talked about this and kind of rallied together, did some book exchanges, which was really cool. And again, shout out to the Lit Room, who's, a very new bookstore opened up in Garden City. They're right across from Push and Pour, and they have been working really hard on this. And I'm personally very grateful for all of their work in many ways. Plus, this is going to affect, if this were to go through, kind of in no matter what form, it's going to affect, the entire Boise Public Library system, which is the largest in the state. And that affects a lot of people, and it affects a lot, specifically one of the biggest parts of this bill. So we'll see what changes, but one of the biggest parts is that it kind of includes in the obscenity terms any sort of homosexuality at all. So could be literally just a queer couple holding hands in a book, like an illustrated book of some sort or something like that. But also, one of the things that I think about with this that I think it's important not to lose sight of is this also can include situations of abuse that a lot of people don't realize. It's very common for people not to really realize that they're in a bad situation until they read or learn about it in some other form, like literature, and you kind of realize oh, this should not be happening to me, and that kind of thing. So a lot of this is sex education material. A lot of it is anything related to queerness and transness in general. So yeah, we'll see what's going on, but it's a pretty fair bet to say that a lot of Boise just does not stand for this.
Right. So some would say that this is overreach. Some would say that this is a slippery slope.
Well, and I mean, it's a slippery slope that we've already been on for several years.
Absolutely. And it'll just keep getting a steeper incline. I just want to go back to something that she also mentioned, and you mentioned earlier, as much as, yes, the sort of the nature of the dynamic of who can protest at the Capitol quickly and in large numbers, the asymmetry of how this might be representative of the general feeling of the public, it works the other way too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think necessarily that most people feel strongly about this book ban outside of a relatively small group of extreme thinkers, and that is pretty much a dynamic that has been push and pull in Idaho politics for quite some time now.
Absolutely.
So I just want to flag that. All right, tell me about the story that you've been tracking. So this week, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to hear a case originating from, I believe, Southern Oregon, Grants Pass.
Yeah,
that could affect how cities address homelessness. Walk me through what the story is.
Okay, yeah. So I wrote about this a little while ago, so we can link to this. But the Supreme Court has taken up Johnson versus the city of Grants Pass, which is a pretty small town in Oregon. But the Ninth Circuit, which covers a lot of the western U.S., said that the city of Grants Pass had violated unhoused people's Eighth Amendment by imposing civil fines for people using, essentially for camping in public spaces. But particularly what this was for is literally using a blanket or a pillow or a cardboard box, any material. And so this was originated from a couple of unhoused folks in Grants Pass who said, wow, can't believe I just got a civil fine for trying to have a blanket when I'm sleeping outside. And so this is the civil case. So the reason that I really wanted to talk about this in Boise is because this case essentially builds on a case out of Boise, which is called Martin v. Boise. And this was a really big one because This group of unhoused folks in Boise came forward and argued that their Eighth Amendment rights were being violated by the city for being criminally prosecuted for sleeping outside on public property without any alternative shelter being available. So,
Right.
any homelessness shelter didn't have space, and so that's why they were sleeping outside. And they said that while that, like in that specific situation where there's no alternative space, you should not be criminally prosecuted for sleeping outside.
Right, quite literally between a rock and a hard place in the sense of there is no services and
Literally.
the other side is criminalization.
Yeah. And so the city of Boise said, essentially, no, we think that we should be able to do that. And so it went up to the Ninth Circuit, and they agreed with the unhoused folks and said, that is a violation of the Eighth Amendment. And so that has stood for several years, and it has had a really interesting ripple effect because this little case out of little old Boise affects, the homelessness populations and the homelessness advocacy groups in cities like Californian cities and Portland and Seattle and whatnot. And of course, there's so much rhetoric about all of that. But so a lot of these states have kind of come together and pushed against the Martin v. Boise case, saying that this has just completely removed our ability to kind of keep the streets quote unquote clean.
Well, such a coded, veiled descriptor.
It is. And so they've said that, there's so many people kind of on that side they have so many different takes, but they've kind of fallen into the same group there, same camp, you could say, who say that they need more authority to be able to, whether you want to say help or really, remove and further criminalize being homeless. And so the Supreme Court has decided to take this up because the case of Johnson v. City of Grants Pass is essentially built off of this Boise case, built off of Martin v. Boise. And as many folks know, the Supreme Court has changed a lot in the last few years. The last time the Supreme Court rejected the case in 2019 and said, the Ninth Circuit Court decision is going to stand. City of Boise, you don't have an appeal in this case. We're going to let that stand. 5 years since, a lot has changed, and so a lot of big cities on the West Coast are throwing their weight behind this, and because the Supreme Court agreed to take up this case, that is usually a signal that they do want to, weigh in on it. They do want to oppose what the lower court said in some way. I don't know. This could be a total walkback of Martin v. Boise. They could totally overturn that. Or it could just apply to civil fines instead of criminal. They could draw the line there. We don't really know yet. And so that's something that we're definitely going to be paying attention to. And it'll be interesting to see how the city of Boise reacts. One interesting note, too, is that even though Grants Pass is in Oregon, the legislature has since, in 2021, they made it illegal for cities to impose any sort of civil or criminal penalties on people who were sleeping outside when there was no alternative shelter. So this case actually won't have any bearing on Oregon, or I guess it'll back their legislation up, but it certainly will affect Boise.
Well, and speaking of sort of like the scarcity of services and shelters provided in general, like this ties back to an episode that we published earlier this week where we brought on Idaho Statesman reporter Rachel Spacek to talk a little bit about this homelessness solution policy or strategy that we know is implemented to quite a bit of success, and a question whether it can actually be imported to Boise. So the folks who are interested in that should listen to the episode, but could you give me like the quick TLDR of like what exactly was in that conversation? Yeah,
so essentially the Nevada, this little city in Nevada, it's about the same size as Boise. So that always kind of, makes you think what we could learn from each other. But essentially the city decided to build a 600-bed tent and then multiple set off on their own little sleeping areas using federal COVID emergency funds to do this. And it did help drastically lower the people who were living on the street, living unhoused. And obviously this is a temporary solution that Reno was able to use, but something like that, could be helpful for Boise. And it's interesting, actually. I remember an old conversation that we had on CityCast Boise with the Interfaith Sanctuary Director, Jody Peterson-Steigers, who talked about last winter, they kind of they got their hands on like this big military hospital grade like tent that they were able to temporarily house people in during the winter. So we've done a tiny, tiny version of that, but within the nonprofit sphere rather than the actual city sphere. So yeah, Boise's not going to be doing that, but that is one option that another city about our size has looked to.
So early this week, Idaho House Majority Leader Megan Blanksma, a Republican, introduced legislation to the HHWC, the House Health and Welfare Committee, that would basically, revive the effort to have a committee that discusses, analyzes, interprets, and studies like maternity mortality data. Deaths due to pregnancy for any multitude of reasons. And this is interesting because we're the only state at this point that does not have such a committee that produces a report around maternity mortality. And the reason we don't have one is because I think the legislation that like powers the existence of this committee was just lapsed into non-existence last year with seemingly little movement to revive it until this week. Of course, this is just the start of the process to get it back up and running. And I should note that Blanksma has said that the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare continues to collect maternal mortality data despite loss of the committee. But, as they say, you are what you measure, and you can only fix what you measure, and you can only fix what you're studying. So this is something that is, I find very encouraging, largely given the broader context of reproductive health in Idaho. Which is, I don't know, we're currently it feels like we're in like deep crisis mode. Would you sort of share that assessment?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. We totally are. I did a dive into just trying to sort out all of my own thoughts. I had a friend who was asking me about okay, so what exactly is the situation with Idaho's abortion bans right now? I looked into that and tried to sort out through all of the lawsuits and all of the cases, just to kind of get a clear view going into the rest of the year. Obviously, this is going to be just a hectic political year, so it's helpful to have some clarity. And so I wrote an article about where Idaho's abortion bans are right now that's available online. So please check that out, and then we'll have this kind of part 2 of it coming out on Monday. But yeah, we lost the Maternal Mortality Review Committee in the same year that the strictest abortion ban in the nation went into effect in Idaho. And that, I mean, really that speaks volumes as to what the state of reproductive healthcare and conservative politics is all about right now. And so I'm at least hopeful that this committee will be coming back. Great that, Department of Health and Welfare is hopefully still looking into this data, but we do need a specific kind of consolidated and public data committee who's willing to be looking into this, because we need to know exactly how these abortion bans are affecting Idahoans. We need to have the anecdotes, and we also need to have the data to back it up.
Right, and to root us a little bit deeper into sort of Boise and the Treasure Valley region, the latest report that was published, I believe it's from 2021, of the 16 deaths that were recorded and studied, almost half was in the Health District 4, which is where Boise resides. And we are in the middle of a very quiet crisis of OBGYNs leaving the state, and a lot of providers are based here in Treasure Valley. But it's also, it's important because rural counties also need reproductive healthcare. And so it's a little bit of a feeling that the reason why it lapsed, it's hard not to sort of see the lapsing of the committee as a way to kind of obscure or blunt the political knife of seeing the effects of this of all of this. And so I don't know, it's just sunlight doesn't disinfect it. That's like the classic truism and the cliche there. But really, really, really we need that data. Okay, in the spirit of this being kind of the end of the week that we're decompressing, let's try to end this on a somewhat lighter note. You told me that you are into a sport. Tell me, let's kind of wrap this up with a little bit of a practical thing, a recommendations corner, we should say.
Yeah.
What can you bring to me today to make me feel better about my life?
Okay, Nick, my pitch is to get into women's college basketball.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. If you were ever thinking about getting into women's college basketball, you need to do it right now, because women's basketball, just like just across the board, professionally and collegiately, and even on the high school level, is seeing just this huge. I don't know. It's just seeing such a surge in popularity and also in the sport itself, how it's being played. And this kind of is in conjunction with the name, image, and likeness deal, NIL, which allows student athletes who are working extremely hard to get some compensation,
share in that profit, share in that value.
And there are just so many incredible college teams across the country. Boise State's women's college basketball team is actually pretty good this year. They've got a pretty solid record. But I'm excited. The reason that I thought about talking this is because I'm heading out of town. I would love to go to some warmer areas right now. But instead I'm going to Salt Lake. But it's fine. But I'm going down to Salt Lake to watch the University of Utah, who is a top 20 team and would certainly be a top 10 team if they hadn't lost their second leading scorer. But they do still have Alyssa Peely, who is one of the best post players in the nation. She is incredible. She's so much fun to watch. She's so dynamic. She's like barely 6 feet tall, but she's so incredible to watch. Yeah. But they are playing against the USC Trojans. So SoCal is coming up, and they are led by one of the reasons that women's college basketball is so interesting right now is because there's this cadre of freshmen across the country who are just incredible. I mean, these are like, you are really watching like the next huge names in women's basketball, not just college, for the rest of their lives. Like, we're all going to be talking about them if you follow basketball at all. There's this huge group of freshmen who are coming in, largely led by USC's Juju Watkins, who I think that they're ranked. I don't remember what they're ranked now, because they actually just last week beat UCLA, who is ranked second, and they were the one of the last two undefeated teams in the nation. And so these two are going to be going head to head. They're in the Pac-12. They're the last. This is the last year of the Pac-12, but it's in conference play. There's a really cool Boise tie-in, which is that Boise High has a player. I believe it's Avery Howell is her name, and she actually just signed USC. So she's going to be going there next year and joining this team that is currently, I think, ranked in the top 5, certainly the top 10. Yeah, that's my plug. That's one of the ways I'm getting through the winter.
How did you get into women's basketball in general, but like Utah State in specific?
I wanted to see Utah play. I wanted to see them play Colorado because, like, 2 West teams, like, that's fun. But I also have a sister who lives down in Utah in Ogden, and so like it's all kind of in the same area.
Listen, bring us that Amtrak line.
I know, gonna drag it up with
I want to
me.
go to Salt Lake. I've not been to Salt Lake myself personally before.
Yeah, you haven't been at all?
I have not. I'm just the airport. I would try to make the drive to watch a Jazz play or something, but like no.
Yeah.
So we're so
maybe
isolated.
you need to watch the University of Utah play. I mean, they're
Absolutely.
really good.
I'll make it a weekend.
Yeah, it's so much fun. So that's what I'm doing, and that's, I think, I needed to turn to something other than movies to entertain me through the winter. So this is what I found. But yeah, what about you? How are you getting through?
Well, I'm the sort of the master of just consuming media as recreation, just to completely ignore everything that's cold and dark outside. I've been watching the Australian Open. I tend to only watch the women's bracket, but I'll give 2 specific recommendations for this week. One is let's give a shout out to the flicks. I saw American Fiction last weekend, which is Corey Jefferson's adaptation of Erasure, which is a novel. And it's got a lot of Oscar buzz around it, and that so the premise of the movie is a black writer, out of frustration with the lack of his publishing career or publishing success, decides to like lean into every sort of Black American publishing trope or tropes that the book publishing industry loves to push in front of white audiences. He leans into those tropes, writes a kind of under a pseudonym this novel, this book, and then gets quite a bit of attention for it. But that is actually just 20% of the movie. The majority of the movie is a slice of life. It's a family drama of this really upper middle class Black family. And what happens to their adult children, and sort of like dealing with the rest of your life. And so it's a movie that has a lot more on its mind than what seems on the surface, and especially that what seems on the premise itself. Yeah. And it's working at a bunch of different levels that I like. It probably will, it might at best snap up like best screenplay, adapted screenplay, maybe. Not even. I think it'll just get aced out by Oppenheimer. But it's a lovely movie. And I think it's probably one of the best things I've seen from the 2023 release cycle, because I would have said best I've seen this year, but it's only 3 weeks into the year. The second thing I recommend is that if you really want to lean deeper into this cold, frigid environment that we have, there's a new season of True Detective out on HBO that you can access on Max, called Night Country, and it takes place in Alaska in the long night. Stars Jodie Foster and Kelly Race, who's this indigenous actress who was a professional, maybe might still be a professional boxer. And they're the kind of the Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson of this particular season. And True Detective has a kind of a troubled kind of reputation for just being very dude bro, and just persistent explorations of various forms of masculinity. This is very much not that. This very much feels like the polar opposite, and it has a really wonderful horror hook to it. So if you're looking for a fun way to get scared and feel even more cold, I highly recommend that. And you don't have to leave your house.
Yeah, I mean, nothing will make you appreciate the sunshine that we do get more than seeing more darkness on TV.
Absolutely right.
I see the logic. Yeah.
Well, Blake, thank you for joining me to round out this week. Stay unfrozen and have fun in the great state of Utah.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Have a good weekend.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. The show was produced by Evelyn Davitia, Frankie Barnhill, Grant Irving, and Dylan Brogan. Blake Hunter writes our Hey Boise newsletter with editing help from Brian Batts. And our music is by Up Is the Down Is That. Tell your local snowplow to listen to the podcast. See ya.